The hallowed halls of the Eastwick Public Library hummed with a quiet reverence, a sound Benjamin Adler cherished more than any symphony. For 30 years Benjamin, a man whose life had been as meticulously catalogued as the books he oversaw, had been the silent custodian of stories. His spectacles, perched perpetually on the bridge of his nose, were gateways to worlds, his fingers, stained faintly with ink, conductors of forgotten narratives. At 57, a widower whose own story had paused abruptly years ago, Benjamin found his truest companionship among the countless voices bound in leather and paper. Today, however, the usual rhythm of his existence was punctuated by a daunting task: clearing out the long-forgotten V-section, a dusty alcove dedicated to local family histories, untouched since the early 1970s. "Vance," Benjamin murmured, running a gloved hand over a spine thick with grime. "Vance, I wonder." The air in the V-section was thick with the scent of aged paper and forgotten lives. Benjamin worked with methodical precision, his heart, as always, stirring with the quiet thrill of discovery. He uncovered forgotten photographs, brittle letters, and the occasional children's book filled with crayon scribbles. It was behind a false panel in a Victorian-era display case meant for rare local maps, a panel Benjamin almost overlooked, that he found it. It wasn't a book, not in the traditional sense. It was a diary, leather-bound, dark green, its edges softened by time, its clasp a tarnished brass bird that seemed to guard secrets. There was no title, no author's name emblazoned on its cover, only the faintest impression of EV beneath the clasp. Benjamin's pulse quickened. This wasn't a catalogued item, it was a ghost, waiting to speak. Back in his office, the diary lay open on his oak desk, a portal to another era. The cursive script, though elegant, was sometimes hurried, sometimes faint, reflecting the turmoil of the thoughts it transcribed. The first entry was dated October 1919. "My dearest journal," it began, "I begin this chronicle not out of joy, but out of a desperate need to record what is true, before it is swallowed by misunderstanding and silence." The author, Eleanor Vance, was a woman of fierce spirit and intellect, trapped by the societal constraints of post-World War I America. Her diary chronicled not just her personal aspirations, a yearning for a life beyond domesticity, a passion for engineering, but more poignantly the slow, agonizing unraveling of her family. Her husband Arthur, a brilliant but financially naive entrepreneur, had invested heavily in a nascent local manufacturing plant, a venture that promised prosperity but delivered only ruin. The common historical narrative, one Benjamin vaguely recalled from local lore, was that Arthur Vance had been reckless, perhaps even dishonest, leading to the family's spectacular downfall and the loss of their estate. Eleanor's entries, however, painted a starkly different picture. Arthur, it revealed, had been relentlessly pressured by a powerful and scrupulous business rival, a man who saw Arthur's innovative spirit as a threat. The ultimate collapse was engineered, a calculated betrayal, to seize Arthur's patents and land. Arthur's honor, Eleanor had written in a trembling hand, was his undoing. He carried the burden of our family's ruin, allowed himself to be seen as the fool, the failure, rather than expose the corruption that would have shattered the community's trust in other innocent ventures. She detailed his agonizing decision to take the blame, to let their name be slandered, to protect not just his partners, but the vulnerable families whose livelihoods depended on the fledgling industrial dream. It was a sacrifice of reputation, a silent martyrdom. A final entry, dated 1928, spoke of Arthur's failing health, broken spirit, and Eleanor's desperate hope that one day the truth will emerge, for the sake of those who come after us, lest they inherit only shame. Benjamin read for hours, captivated, a witness to a century-old tragedy. The diary wasn't just a historical document, it was a plea from the past, a whispered truth yearning to be heard. He felt a profound sense of responsibility. This wasn't merely a lost item, it was a lost legacy, a stain on a family name that might still be affecting descendants. His librarian's instinct, honed over decades, kicked in. Using old city directories, property records, and a nascent online genealogical database, Benjamin began to trace the Vance lineage. It was slow, painstaking work, like piecing together a fragile mosaic. The name Vance had faded from prominence, but it hadn't vanished entirely. He found them, the last direct line, a father and son still living in Eastwick. Howard and Michael Vance. The address, a modest house on the outskirts of town, was easy enough to find. The harder part was Benjamin's inherent reticence. He was a man of books, not of confrontation or emotional intervention. Yet Eleanor's words pulsed in his mind, for the sake of those who come after us. This wasn't meddling, this was stewardship. He found Howard in his garage, hunched over an antique chest, sanding with meticulous care. Howard Vance, a man in his late 50s, had the weathered hands of a craftsman and eyes that held the stubborn resignation of someone who had carried a heavy weight for too long. His face was a roadmap of unspoken struggles, lines etched deep around his mouth. "Mr. Vance?" Benjamin began, his voice a little softer than usual. Howard looked up, his gaze wary, almost hostile. "Can I help you?" Benjamin introduced himself, holding the leather diary carefully. "I'm Benjamin Adler from the library. I believe I've found something that belongs to your family." Howard eyed the diary, then Benjamin, with a mixture of suspicion and disinterest. "My family doesn't have anything worth losing, library man. Haven't had much of anything for generations." The bitterness in his voice was palpable. Just then a younger man emerged from the house, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. This was Michael, Howard's son, 20 years old, with his father's dark hair but a leaner build, and a restlessness in his eyes that spoke of unfulfilled potential. He looked at Benjamin with the same wariness, though tinged with a youthful curiosity. "What's going on, Dad?" "Just a librarian with a misplaced book," Howard grunted. "It's not just a book, Mr. Vance," Benjamin insisted, his resolve firming. He opened the diary to a page he knew held particular poignancy. This is a diary. Written by Eleanor Vance, your great-grandmother, I believe. It speaks of Arthur Vance. The name seemed to hang in the air, a ghost that had haunted their family for a century. Howard's stern facade cracked, just a fraction. He turned back to his sanding, but his movements were less fluid now. Michael, however, stepped closer, intrigued despite himself. "Arthur Vance," Michael repeated, a faint sneer on his face. "The one who lost everything, right? The notorious financial genius who bankrupted us all." Benjamin's heart ached for them. The inherited shame, the distortion of truth, had twisted generations. "That's how the story was told, yes," Benjamin said gently. "But the diary, it tells a different story. A story of sacrifice, of honor." Howard scoffed, a dry, humorless sound. "Honor? There's no honor in failure, librarian. Just failure." "Dad," Michael began, a flicker of something in his eyes. He picked up a small, ornate wooden box on Howard's workbench, running his thumb over it. "What if he's right?" Benjamin seized the moment. "May I read you something?" Without waiting for an answer, he began to read Eleanor's entry from November 1920. Arthur returned tonight, his spirit broken, his face etched with the weight of decisions no man should have to make. "He told me of the ultimatum: expose the corruption of Blackwood Industries and bring down his own venture, or take the fall himself, saving the jobs of those who trusted him, but losing everything else. He chose to protect them, to let his name be sullied, to bear the shame alone. My heart aches for his silent courage, a courage the world will never know." Howard had stopped sanding. His shoulders were stiff, his breath shallow. Michael had dropped the wooden box, his eyes wide with a dawning comprehension. Benjamin continued, his voice steady, painting a picture of a man unjustly maligned, a hero in disguise. He read of Arthur's quiet dignity, his refusal to betray the trust placed in him, even as it cost him his fortune and his reputation. When Benjamin finally closed the diary, the garage was utterly silent, save for the faint hum of distant traffic. Howard slowly turned, his face pale beneath the grime. He reached out, not for the diary, but for a tarnished silver locket that hung around his neck, usually hidden beneath his shirt. He clutched it, his knuckles white. "My father," Howard whispered, his voice raspy, he said Arthur was a good man. A good man who made a bad mistake. He never told me it was like this." Tears welled in his aged eyes, tears that must have been held back for decades. The hard shell around his heart began to crack. Michael, watching his father's raw emotion, felt a tremor run through him. His own resentment, the anger at his father's stoicism and perceived failures, suddenly seemed petty, misdirected. He had always seen Howard as burdened, but now he understood the source of that burden, not just the legacy of failure, but the unspoken, unmourned truth. "Dad," Michael said, his own voice thick with emotion, "all those times you never told me." Howard finally looked at his son, his eyes swimming. "How could I? Our family history, it was a weight. I just knew Arthur had ruined us. I tried to make things right, tried to build something, but it always felt like I was fighting against a curse. The diary lay between them, a silent arbiter. Benjamin watched as the layers of inherited pain began to peel away. Howard, for the first time, spoke of the pressure he'd felt, the shame of the Vance name that had been a silent companion throughout his life, driving him to work relentlessly, making him rigid, unable to express the love and fear he held for Michael. Michael, in turn, began to understand his father's distant nature, not as a lack of love, but as a desperate struggle against a century-old shadow. They spent the rest of the afternoon in the dusty garage, Benjamin reading aloud from Eleanor's diary, sometimes only a few lines, sometimes entire pages. Each word was a bomb, a revelation. The diary explained why Howard was so obsessed with restoring old furniture, why he valued integrity above all else, why he pushed Michael so hard to be financially stable. It wasn't about control, it was about trying to heal a wound that wasn't even his own. The truth, once hidden, now shone with a brilliant, cleansing light. Howard and Michael, two men who had lived under the same roof for years, speaking mostly in clipped tones of duty and frustration, finally began to speak the language of the heart. Apologies were offered, not just for recent wrongs but for the misunderstandings of a lifetime. The weight of inherited shame lifted, replaced by a profound sense of pride in their ancestors' selfless courage. The following week, Benjamin saw Michael at the library. He was not looking for job postings or escapist fiction, but books on local history, on industrial development in the early 20th century. He even asked Benjamin for advice on tracing further details about Blackwood Industries. Michael had decided to pursue a degree in history, to not just learn the past, but to understand its nuances, inspired by Eleanor's diary. He even talked about starting a small woodworking business with his father, merging his artistic eye with Howard's craftsmanship, a tribute to Arthur's thwarted dreams of creation. Howard, too, seemed transformed. Benjamin saw him a few times in town, no longer hunched, but walking with a newfound lightness. One afternoon, Howard came to the library, not to return a book, but to speak with Benjamin. "Benjamin," he said, using his first name for the first time, Michael and I, we want to thank you. You didn't just find an old book. You gave us back our family. You gave us back our pride." He extended a gnarled hand and Benjamin, for once, didn't hesitate to take it. Benjamin Adler returned to his quiet duties, but the library felt different. The air no longer carried just the scent of old paper, but also the faint, sweet perfume of hope. He had always believed in the power of stories, but never had he witnessed their transformative magic so directly. He had been a guardian of history, but in finding Eleanor's diary, he had become an unwitting architect of a new future. His own quiet life, once a solemn repository of memories, now chimed with a renewed purpose, a gentle, resonant echo of the voices he had helped set free. The library was not just a place where stories resided, it was a place where they came alive, mending broken families and inspiring new beginnings, all thanks to a silent, unassuming librarian who dared to listen to the whispers of the past. That will be all for today. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button. Goodbye.